I had walked through the factory doors that morning like any other day, carrying my lunch bag in the quiet certainty that I was doing what I was supposed to do. 12 years. 12 years of showing up before anyone else, of wiping grease from my hands and keeping my head down. It never occurred to me that all of it could be taken away with a single sentence. "Harper," my supervisor said, and I looked up, expecting some routine notice or a comment about production schedules. Instead, I was handed a small cardboard box with my personal items. "Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately," he said. No discussion, no warning, no acknowledgement of the years I had poured into this place. The words landed like bricks, heavy and suffocating. I didn't even have time to process the job loss before I came home to a second. Far worse blow. Brandon's eyes were cold, distant, and his voice carried a weight I had never heard before. "You're worthless." "I'm taking the kids," he said, as if announcing something as ordinary as the weather. My knees weakened, and I gripped the kitchen counter, trying to hold myself together. The children's laughter from the living room, the crayon drawings taped to the fridge, the bedtime stories I had read 100 times, all of it felt like it was slipping away in a blur. Shame settled over me like a suffocating fog. Had I failed them? Had I failed myself? Every choice, every sacrifice, every quiet moment I had spent trying to keep this family together seemed meaningless. I had dedicated myself to providing, to creating stability, to showing up. And yet, here I was, stripped of everything I thought defined me. I sat at the edge of the couch, staring at the floor, trying to anchor myself. The weight of the job, the marriage, the children, everything was pressing down, and I had nowhere to release it. The familiar walls of the home I had fought to maintain now felt like a cage, reminding me how fragile the life I had built really was. And so I walked out the door, not knowing where I was going, only that I needed to breathe, to move, to escape the suffocating emptiness that had swallowed my world that day. I stepped out into the crisp September air, my hands trembling and my mind spinning. The streetlights flickered along the familiar sidewalks, but nothing felt familiar anymore. Every corner, every tree-lined block reminded me of routines I had once taken comfort in morning walks with the kids to the school bus. Evenings spent reading stories, the way Nolan's laughter would echo through the hallway. Those memories now felt like ghosts, taunting me with what I had lost in a single afternoon. My shoes scuffed against the pavement as I wandered without direction, my body moving on autopilot while my thoughts ran in circles. I remembered the nights I stayed up late helping Tessa with her puzzles, the weekends I worked extra shifts just to make sure bills were paid, the quiet mornings when I brewed coffee for Brandon before he even woke. All of it seemed insignificant now, meaningless against the crushing weight of rejection and failure. With each step, a sense of isolation wrapped around me tighter. I passed neighbors who waved or greeted me, strangers who smiled politely, but their words felt distant, irrelevant, invisible, abandoned. I felt untethered from the life I had spent years building, disconnected from the home that had once been a sanctuary. The chill of the evening pressed against my skin, but it was nothing compared to the emptiness settling in my chest. I realized that walking wasn't just an escape from the house, it was a way to try to reclaim some part of myself, even if I didn't know where to go or what to do next. Eventually, I found myself moving toward the bright glow of a small diner on Main Street, drawn to its warmth without understanding why. My footsteps carrying me closer to a place that would change the course of the night. The neon sign buzzed faintly as I approached the diner, its warm yellow glow spilling onto the sidewalk. It was the kind of place most people drove past without a second glance, nestled between a gas station and a small bookstore. But tonight it called to me in a way I couldn't explain. I pushed open the door, and the subtle chime of the bell announced my arrival. The air inside was rich with the smell of brewing coffee and sizzling bacon. a comforting scent that felt almost foreign against the emptiness I carried with me. I slid into a booth near the back, away from the handful of patrons scattered throughout the room. The soft hum of conversation and the occasional clatter of dishes contrasted sharply with the chaos swirling in my head. I stared into the dark coffee in the cup the waitress placed before me, tracing the reflection of my face and wondering how someone I once was could have arrived at this point. For the first time since stepping out of the house, I let myself notice the small details. A man at the counter stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. A couple laughed softly in a corner booth, and the waitress moved with quiet familiarity, topping off cups and exchanging brief smiles with regulars. The normalcy of it all was almost painful, reminding me of everything I had lost. Yet at the same time, it was grounding. I sipped the coffee, bitter but steadying, and allowed myself to sit in the discomfort of being alone yet surrounded by life. My thoughts wandered through the day's events, through memories of Nolan's wide eyes and Tessa's small hands, through the routine I had clung to for years that now felt like a fragile illusion. And yet, in that small diner, amid the ordinary movements of strangers and the soft glow of neon, I felt the first flicker of connection to something beyond my despair. I didn't know it yet, but the night was far from over. As I stared into my cup, unaware of the life-changing encounter about to occur, the door opened again, and she entered a presence that would alter the course of everything I thought I knew about myself and my future. I was lost in the swirl of my own thoughts when the booth across from me shifted, and a soft voice spoke. "You look just like my missing daughter." I froze, unsure if I had heard correctly. The woman who had settled beside me was small, but carried an unshakable presence. Her hair, silver and neatly pulled back, framed a face lined with decades of experience. Her eyes, however, held a clarity that seemed to see straight through me. I wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, to tell myself it was nothing, but something in the weight of her gaze kept me silent. I hesitated, then found myself nodding, allowing a single word to slip out. I'm Harper." Her expression softened, but there was an intensity beneath it, a quiet insistence that I continue. Slowly, I began to speak. I told her about the job I had just lost, the words Brandon had thrown at me, and the unbearable fear of losing Nolan and Tessa. My voice was quiet at first, then steadier as the story poured out. Every confession felt like a small relief, a release of the tension that had gripped me all day. She listened without interruption, leaning slightly forward, her hands resting lightly on the table. There was no judgment in her presence, only understanding and patience. When she finally spoke again, it wasn't with advice or instruction, but with a calm observation. "You carry a weight that isn't yours to bear alone. I know what it feels like to fear losing someone you love, and yet I also know the power of standing even when everything seems lost." Her words lingered in the air, filling the empty spaces around me. For the first time since leaving my house, I felt that maybe someone outside my world could understand, not just hear me, but truly see me. I didn't yet know how, but I sensed that her presence would guide me toward a choice I hadn't believed I could make. And then she leaned closer, preparing to speak the words that would change the course of my night. As I sat across from Eleanor, her steady gaze urging me to keep speaking, my mind drifted back to the wide fields and quiet streets of my childhood in rural Indiana. My parents had raised me with a clear sense of responsibility: work hard, keep your word, and treat others with empathy. My father spent hours teaching me the value of perseverance, whether it was fixing an old tractor or learning how to manage the small farm accounts. My mother, softer in tone but no less firm, had shown me that patience and kindness could shape lives in ways strength alone never could. Those lessons had guided me into adulthood, shaping the woman who believed she could do everything, if only she tried hard enough. I remembered the day Brandon and I married, full of hope and determination. We had built a home together, laughing in the empty rooms as we imagined a future with children and stability. When Nolan arrived, I felt the weight of responsibility balanced with joy. And then Tessa, her tiny hand curled around my finger, reminded me that love was not measured by perfection, but by presence. But somewhere along the way, the path I had so carefully followed began to crumble. The marriage I had fought to maintain became a series of arguments and silences. Brandon's praise had turned into criticism, and his distant behavior forced me to carry the bulk of our emotional life alone. The job I had once been proud of was gone, leaving me questioning not just my worth as an employee, but as a partner and a mother. I blamed myself constantly, wondering if I had failed to speak up, to fight harder, to see the warning signs sooner. Eleanor's presence kept me grounded. She didn't offer easy answers or false consolation. Instead, she held space for my regrets, allowing me to see how my blind spots had kept me trapped in self-blame. I realized that dwelling on what I could have done differently wouldn't restore what I had lost, but understanding those mistakes could help me act differently now. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my chest loosen just slightly. The past had taught me many things, but it was time to decide whether I would let it define me or use it to find the courage I desperately needed. And in that quiet moment, I felt Eleanor shift closer, preparing to speak the words that might finally give me the clarity to move forward. Eleanor leaned slightly closer, her voice steady but quiet, carrying a weight that made me sit up straighter. "Don't abandon your children." The words struck me harder than anything Brandon had said, harder than the shock of losing my job. I stared at her, my coffee trembling in my hands, the cup rattling softly against the table as if it were echoing the sudden shift in my chest. For the first time that night, I felt a fragile spark of hope, like a small flame flickering in the darkness of everything I had lost. I realized, in that moment, that I had a choice. I didn't have to let fear or shame dictate my actions. I could let despair win, or I could stand and fight for the two most important people in my life. Nolan and Tessa didn't deserve to feel abandoned. They didn't deserve a mother who gave up before trying. My stomach twisted with a mix of guilt and determination. But beneath it all, something began to shift. I had spent so long believing that showing up, staying silent, and enduring was enough. But those habits had brought me here on the edge of losing them completely. I held the cup tightly, willing it to be steady as I let Eleanor's words sink deeper. Each heartbeat echoed the truth I had been avoiding. Courage wasn't a sudden burst, but a decision made in moments like this, when all the world seemed to be closing in. I thought of the countless nights I had tucked Nolan and Tessa into bed, promising them the world in ways I had yet to deliver. I could no longer rely on promises without action. A clarity settled over me, firm and undeniable. I would act. I would confront Brandon. I would reclaim my presence in their lives, no matter the difficulty. The night had brought me to the brink, but Eleanor's 5 words had opened the door I hadn't seen. I set the coffee down carefully, the trembling subsiding, and breathed deeply. The next steps would be hard, but for the first time, I felt the spark of courage steady enough to carry me forward. And as I straightened in the booth, Eleanor's eyes held mine, waiting for the moment I would take the first step toward what I knew I had to do. I left the diner that night with Eleanor's words echoing in my mind. "Don't abandon your children." They weren't just words, they were a command I couldn't ignore. The chill in the September air hit my skin, but it was nothing compared to the storm that had been building inside me for hours. I had to see them. I had to show up. The first step was admitting to myself that fear had ruled me for too long. Brandon's anger, his control, the threat of rejection, all of it had convinced me that surrender was easier than confrontation. But I could no longer hide behind what felt safe. I sat in my car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, letting the tension tighten and then loosen, imagining Nolan's eyes and Tessa's small hand in mine. They were counting on me to act, even if I doubted my own strength. I began to plan carefully, mapping out a route to Brandon's sister's house where I suspected he would take the kids tonight. I reminded myself of small acts of courage from my own life the nights I had stayed late to help Tessa with puzzles, the mornings I had pushed through exhaustion to pack Nolan's lunch. Courage was not a single grand gesture. It was built through persistence, through showing up when it mattered most. Doubt gnawed at me with every mile. What if he refused to let me see them? What if they didn't understand? My hands tightened on the steering wheel. But with each question, the determination grew. I told myself that fear and uncertainty were not signs of weakness. They were reminders that what I was about to do mattered. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my resolve had solidified. The house loomed ahead, the lights in the windows casting familiar shapes on the lawn. I stepped out of the car, straightened my shoulders, and carried myself with the quiet strength I had summoned from the fragments of courage Eleanor had ignited. This was my moment to act, to reclaim the presence in my children's lives that they needed and deserved. I walked toward the door, ready to face whatever awaited me inside, knowing that stepping forward was the first true act of bravery I had made that night. I paused at the front door of Brandon's sister's house, taking a deep breath before lifting my hand to knock. The night air seemed heavier here, filled with the tension of everything that had gone wrong. My heart pounded, but I reminded myself that fear had no place in this moment. I had chosen courage, and it demanded I follow through. When the door opened, Brandon's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone sharp, almost defensive. I swallowed hard, but didn't retreat. "I came for Nolan and Tessa," I said calmly. "I'm not leaving without seeing them." His jaw tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "This isn't the time," he said. "They've had enough for tonight." But I held my ground, refusing to be intimidated. I stepped forward, extending my hands toward my children, who were standing cautiously behind him. Nolan's wide eyes met mine first, a mix of confusion and hope, and then Tessa peeked from behind, her small hand clutching a stuffed animal. I crouched slightly, pressing a gentle hand on Nolan's shoulder. "I'm here," I said softly. "I'm not going anywhere. I love you, and I want to be with you." Tessa reached for me immediately, wrapping her arms around my leg. The weight of the day, the week, and all the months of fear and absence pressed down on me. But in that embrace, I felt a clarity I hadn't known before. Brandon shifted, crossing his arms, but I noticed the tension in his posture, a recognition of the boundaries I was now claiming. I lifted the crayon drawings Tessa had taped to the fridge in my mind, and then the photograph Nolan had drawn of us holding hands, imagining holding them both as a tangible promise. This was more than confrontation. It was reclamation. I stood, letting my presence radiate calm authority rather than anger. Brandon might challenge me verbally, but my commitment to my children was unwavering. Every step, every gesture reinforced that I would not be pushed aside, and that my place in their lives was real and unshakable. And as I held them close, the small sparks of relief in their eyes gave me the courage to face whatever came next. The days after seeing Nolan and Tessa again felt heavy but purposeful. I returned to part-time work at a small delivery service, balancing shifts with school pickups and bedtime stories. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't erase the past, but every morning I woke with a sense of agency I hadn't felt in months. Showing up, being present, mattered more than perfection. With the children, I focused on consistency. Breakfasts were no longer rushed or silent. I listened to Nolan's endless questions about engines and the world, and I laughed at Tessa's imaginative stories about animals she drew for the fridge. Each interaction, each small act of care, reminded me that love was measured in presence. not in grand gestures or approval from others. Brandon remained a presence, occasionally distant or critical, but his challenges no longer shook me. I had learned that my self-worth did not depend on his opinion or the stability of a marriage that had grown fractured. The lessons Eleanor had imparted the power of standing when it feels impossible. The courage to act despite fear were no longer abstract ideas. They guided my decisions daily. One evening, I found myself back at the diner. I searched the booths for Eleanor, hoping to thank her, but she wasn't there. The waitress gave me a polite smile and shook her head, leaving only the memory of the old woman's words lingering in the air. Her presence had been brief, yet its impact was enduring. I left quietly, carrying forward the guidance she had offered, aware that some lessons live on even when the teacher is gone. I returned home, holding Nolan's hand and tucking Tessa into bed, feeling a steady pulse of confidence in my chest. Life was still imperfect. Challenges remained, both with work and with Brandon. But I knew now that being present for my children was enough to define my worth. And with that understanding, I closed the door behind me, ready to face whatever came next with courage and clarity.